So, and good morning to those who are joining us online as well. So this is a meeting of the Isle of Wight Council's Audit and Governance Committee now. So we have added the word governance into our title I think it covers more clearly what we are about, not just audit, but looking at the processes and the way in which the Isle of Wight Council does its business. I toyed with asking for council to add value for money to the title as well, but I thought that might be begging a little bit too much from things. So before we move on, I will just alert you to the fact that there has been a planned fire drill since the alarms have been sounded. So if you do hear an alarm going, it is a real alert. So treat it as a real emergency, evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route, which is for us through those doors, for the member of the public through the doors, the back there, down the back stairs, and walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is pavement opposite the police station. Do remember, of course, that lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. So that's dealt with that little piece of housekeeping. For the benefit of recording, my name's Andrew Garrett, Councillor Andrew Garrett. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm joined by my colleagues who are members of the council and by officers of the council as well, and indeed a member of the press. Always delighted to see you here covering our exciting business. So, first thing I should ask, are there any apologies?
Yes, Councillor Christian has given.
Thank you for that. And there's also been a change in membership, so I should note and welcome to the committee Councillor Churchman, who is not only joining the committee but is also joining as the vice chair of this committee, and Councillor Jarman. I believe the remainder of you are ongoing, which is yeah. And Councillor Christensen, who has given her apologies, of course, is joining the committee. So, obviously, I place on record my thanks to those who have left the committee, in particular Councillor Michael Lilly, who served as my vice chairman for very ably the last couple of years. Councillor Churchman, you wish to add something?
Yes, a request, please. Could people please bring their mics in front of them? I've got a dreadful cold, so I've got a head full of cotton wool. But if the mics are too far away, it's very difficult to pick up the sound. You have chair, you've got yours, what I consider is the right place. Thank you.
Indeed. So I'm sure we've all paid attention to that, and we're shuffling them towards us as we go through. So let's start with item 1, apologies and changes in membership. Next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Those who were present, are there any corrections you wish to see to those minutes? Otherwise, I'll put from the chair that we do confirm those as a true record of the meeting. And I see nods in the sense. So slight hiatus whilst I initial and sign. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Does any member have a declaration to make? Councillor Lucioni first.
Thank you, Chair. I will not be taking part in number 7, the internal progress report. There's a few things that I'm got conflict with. Thank you.
And Councillor John.
Yes, Chair. So on several of the items we're discussing the audit during a period where I was the Cabinet member for that. I don't think that excludes me from taking part in it. But some of the items I might choose just to rest back a little bit on. That's all right with you. And then there are a couple of other items that refer to the Ukrainian situation and support for Ukrainians. I have 2 Ukrainian families and another one arriving tomorrow that we're hosting. So I don't think that compromises me in any way on that debate, but just to declare that as a non-pecuniary interest, I suppose, in terms of the discussion.
Thank you, and it is always important just to highlight those sorts of things. So if anything does occur during the meeting, don't be afraid to place that on record. I don't, from what Councillor Jarman has said, there's nothing there that would suggest a conflict of interests, but I'm sure if you think of it, bring it to our attention. In which case, I'm delighted at item 4 to say that we have a public questioner. So if I could invite the questioner to come forward, there'll be a button on the mic there which brings it on. If you could introduce yourself first for the record and then put your question.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Simon Richards. I'm a resident of Newport and I'm also Chair of Governors at Haylands Primary School. And my question does relate indeed to education. The Papers for Schools Forum on the 13th of July reported that in 2 years' time, 66% of maintained schools are at risk of being in deficit. As this is omitted from the Council's strategic risk register, can the committee confirm how those projected deficits will be absorbed within existing financial resources?
So I'm not sure it's something that the Audit and Governance Committee can directly absorb into that. What we can do, though, and under our discussion under the strategic risk register, bring up that point and put it to officers and the cabinet member who is online with us as well, that that should be considered for inclusion into the risk register. I look to my right just to see if there's any officer who wishes to guide me further on that. Otherwise, I think, Mr. Richards, if that is acceptable to you and you wish to stay for that discussion, of course, you will hear us making that point. But would you like us to ask a supplementary to that?
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, I'm unable to stay for the duration of the meeting, but I look forward to reading that in the minutes. My follow-up question is also relating to school finances. One mitigation for school deficit budgets that has been recommended to several committees over the last year, including Cabinet, is the reduction in the number of primary schools. Is the absence of this mitigation from the risk register an indication that the Council has no intention of taking this necessary action, despite the rhetoric from the Cabinet Member for Children's Services?
A very interesting question, and I think because there's a clear division between what Audit and Governance does and the policy side of the work that we do. I'm sure the Cabinet Member, Councillor Bacon, will take that back. But also Councillor Luciani, who is a member of this committee, is a Cabinet Member. Take it back to Cabinet. I can't answer on the committee's behalf as to Cabinet Members' policy thinking, I'm afraid, Mr. Richards. So, sorry to let you down.
Thank you very much for your response.
It's very, very useful to have people come here and take the opportunity to ask us questions. I am genuinely delighted to see you up there. Do come again. Just finally, I know you cannot stay for our discussion, but you, either read it back in the minutes, or if you feel so enthused, then you can watch a recording of our proceedings as well, because of course they are recorded, and probably even give you a highlight to the time in that recording for when we do that. But thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair.
That was great. I was trying to remember when we last had a question. I think it was about 6 meetings ago. So, but perhaps the member of the press here can highlight the way that here is a way of challenging the council's, which isn't just the normal theatres of full council and cabinet where the public can ask questions. Thank you for that. So we'll now move on to item 5. It's the reports of the external auditor from Ernst & Young. They are not with us physically today, although they have promised that they will be at our September meeting. I had a briefing from them last week. Thank you both Helen and Jason for that. And we will now receive your verbal update.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies that we're not with you in person this morning. Good morning, members. in terms of an update, when we presented our reports for the 21-22 audits, so for the financial statements ending 31st of March 22, at your last meeting in March, we had expected our work to be completed in advance of this meeting. Sadly, we're not quite there. The work that we were required to undertake in relation to testing membership data, which was a consequence of the council receiving its triennial valuation of the pension fund before we were able to sign the opinion, has taken a little longer than we expected. However, I am very pleased to say that we've received responses to our queries, and that will allow us to complete our audit work on this area and be able to conclude and issue the audit reports. We've also received at the end of last week the letter of management assurance responses from Chris Ward as the Section 151 officer, which again will allow us to complete our final steps. So I'm really pleased to say that our work is pretty much complete. It is subject to review, and we anticipate signing the audit reports for both the council and the pension fund within the next couple of weeks. Obviously, we're in the summer period, therefore holidays do get a little bit in the way. We would like to place our thanks on record for the support that we have had from officers as we've completed that work. We know it's taken a lot of time when, hope really everybody should be focusing on the next set of accounts rather than 21-22. Jason, is there anything that you would like to add to that? And then subject to that, we're happy to take questions or comments.
Yeah, no, not really anything to add on to that, Ellen. As you mentioned, it was quite a protracted process to get all the information for the membership data testing, because it was some of the evidence was at the council, some of it was at the pension fund, some of it was at the individual schools, and some of it was at Strictly Education. So it did take us a while to chase up the various bits and pieces of information that we needed to conclude. But as Ellen said, we've now gone through that work, and it's just now subject to review, and then we'll be able to conclude in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, do you have questions? Councillor Jarman.
Yeah, so one of the issues that's come up repeatedly has been not only pressure of work, but changes in the regulatory environment as well. I wondered if you saw any hurdles that would cause a continuing delay in the next financial year's audit.
Chair, happy to take that question. So, and thank you. It's a very good question and very pertinent, because there have been a lot of discussions, as I'm sure members will be aware, through the Select Committee for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And there was a letter issued, I think now a couple of weeks ago, by the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities to set out a way forward. At this point in time, we cannot give a absolutely clear answer as to what this will mean for the timing and delivery of the 22-23 audit. But the intention of the proposal set out by the Minister and the intention of all of the stakeholders within the system is that something is done, and it may well be quite radical, to be able to get all councils back on track for the 23-24 year. So that's the year ending 31st of March 24, i.e. the financial year that we are currently in. The regulations as things stand require that the 23-24 audit is completed by the end of September 24. The intention is to get to a place where that becomes possible, albeit that date may potentially move. We don't know, but regulations are currently end of September. There are different points that need to be, or different considerations to take into account. Firstly, the NAO is considering the level of work that auditors are required to undertake, and that's being done in conjunction with the regulators to ensure that we don't reduce the scope of the work on the one hand, but the regulators, on the other hand, expect us to carry out the same level of work that we have been doing. And once we establish the impact of that, we will then be in a better position. And when I say we, I mean all audit firms, not just EY, to understand the impact on delayed on audits that are not yet started. So in some cases, some councils have very delayed audits going back to, I believe, as far as 15, 16, 16, 17. Clearly, the council is not in that position. But at this stage, we cannot give a completely firm answer in relation to when will the audit be done. We are a little reluctant to get too much work started until we know the scope of the work, because the one thing we don't want to do is to carry out work that would not be required. That's sort of taking time out of officers' availability as well as our own. I'm not sure, hope that answers the question. Happy to take any follow-up questions that you may have.
Councillor Jarman, do you want to follow on from that?
It is exactly the answer I had expected. I understand what's going on with the levelling up discussion, but is there anything that you think we can do as a council to aid the process going forward? Are there any recommendations that you could build in? I know it's not normally part of an audit in that way, but anything that comes to mind that we could do, perhaps not radical as you used, as the levelling up discussion might be, but perhaps more subtle, things that we could do to aid your process in the next round?
That's a good point, and I might ask Jason if he has any particular views on it as well. My sense is that for the 21-22 audit, we started our work later than we would ordinarily have done, but actually the audit ran pretty smoothly in terms of the way the working papers that officers had prepared, the quality of the draft financial statements and the responses to our queries. We were very close to being completed at the point at which the issue, particularly in relation to the triennial pension fund, sort of emerged and complicated matters for the end of March 22. Ordinarily, we would have considered all of those matters as part of our 22-23 audit. So actually, I think the processes that the council have in place are very supportive of the work that we do, and we had actually were started and completed in a reasonable length of time. I think, is that fair, Jason?
Yeah, no, that is, Helen. And yeah, early engagement is important. And for 22-23, we've already had meetings with our new key contact for the audit, Barry Downer, just to get him up to speed in terms of the audit process, what information he needs to be available at the various points in the audit. So we've had that engagement already. So the council has been proactive in that respect. But as Ellen mentioned earlier, the scope of the audit we not sure of at this point in time. But the engagement with the council is a good track record. So I think the council is doing everything that it can to ensure a smooth audit process.
Absolutely. And if I could just come back in, I think what I would say is the important thing for the next few months as the proposals become more clear will be early and good communication between ourselves and council. And I've got no doubt that that will continue. Obviously, I am coming to the end of my time as the council's engagement lead, and it will become Kevin Suter who will be working with Jason. But the processes that we have in place, I think, will help us smooth that through.
Colleagues, any other questions on this? I have no additional questions. We obviously had a very good discussion last week, and Councillor Jarman has pulled out the points that you were making to me last week. Obviously, we do hope that whatever comes forward, which I noted that the something is done directive, does come forward, that it is clear that it had come soon, and that it is something that all those involved have the capacity to deliver on. I guess the thing that, if I got this right, the tension is between having too much to do within the capacity and having, but the flip side is cutting the cloth to the capacity, but then there is risk to potentially not covering everything that would ideally be covered. Would that be right, or am I misunderstanding?
No, that's a very fair summary. I think the point at the moment is we've got a clear understanding of what we want of what everybody would like the outcome to be, which is to get council accounts back on track. We do have some certainty, so we know that there will still be a requirement to complete the audit of the pension fund in particular. The department's been very clear around that. And we know that we will be required to do some work around value for money, which is perhaps not a surprise given a number of councils reporting themselves to be struggling with their financial positions. Thankfully, not something immediately of a concern for Isle of Wight, but so we know that that's work that we have to undertake. The other side of it is if all sides are to be on track for 23-24, then we need to know exactly how much work is required and what capacity is required, both for councils and for auditors, to deliver to the deadline. Because I think it is right that the department is saying if we are going to take a potentially radical solution to the open audits, then there has to be a holding to account of both councils and firms going forward to meeting the delivery requirements, i.e. the deadlines.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, then we'll note that verbal update from Ernst & Young. Thank them for attending. I presume you will stay online to watch the rest of our proceedings?
We will, yes. We will, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will move us on now to item, what number is it? I've lost track already, haven't I? So that was item 6. So we're on to the internal audit annual report. I'm sure members have given this great attention, but I will invite the Chief Internal Auditor and Audit Manager just to highlight any key points. But obviously, this is being your annual report, you may want to be sort of like highlighting to us particular themes that emerged and things that you might feel that we as a committee should have an eye to in the coming year.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the annual report, there is a number of items that are included within this report which are standard because we need to abide by public sector internal audit standards. That said, the work that we perform over the course of the year contributes towards the opinion of the effectiveness of the internal control framework. That opinion is based on work that we've carried out in the last year, but it's also based on other intelligence and information that we have to hand, whether we attend various other senior management forums, and whether we perform any investigation work throughout the course of the year. The internal control framework at the Isle of Wight Council is actually pretty robust, which is what is fueling the opinion of reasonable assurance. Saying that, I would just like to flag to you that whilst there are individual areas to which there could be improvements for the control environment, there isn't anything that is systemic across the council that is causing us concern from our perspective. Obviously, you are in a stage where you are restructuring. You are going to lose some experienced members of staff inevitably. Due to that restructure, you have some financial pressures, and obviously the economic climate to which we're in will all influence, be it that it will be delayed, it will all influence the internal control framework. I have noted in the report and in the opinion that whilst the underlying results from last year don't show anything, there has been a little pattern of some thefts and frauds. This is across the client portfolio, but there were a couple as well on the Isle of Wight side of the equation, nothing significant. But what that highlights to us is that there is a potential for deterioration in the control environment, and we need to keep a watching brief on that. That's already been flagged in the annual governance statement, and actions already been implemented to A, monitor the position, and B, get a better steer as well for whether there are any other particular pockets that are causing concern. Also included in this report is the fact that the Internal Audit Service has to have an independent assessment on its quality. That is at the back of the report, and that is stating to you that we comply with the public sector internal audit standards. The highest level that you can obtain is generally conforms, which I must admit I don't like the terminology, but we generally perform. So that again is contained within it. There is some statistical information, but that is to give you a bit of a flavour for where those particular pockets and areas are where there are some control concerns, but nothing significant. Chair, beyond that, at this stage, I am happy to answer any questions, but it is reasonable assurance on your internal control framework.
Well, thank you very much for that. If I can open the questions, obviously you've referenced the restructure, and everywhere I've worked, people will always talk about the loss of institutional memory when members of staff leave in one way or another. To what extent do you, because there will be some impact around sort of the things that you would be looking at, have you been sort of engaged with the process leading towards that restructure to sort of flag particular things to the chief executive and her team as to minimize the risk of that loss of institutional memory, those little bits of nuggets that just people hold in their heads rather than are documented somewhere?
We've been kept in the loop throughout, and I have regular discussions with Wendy, so any particular concerns that we may have get flagged as and when obviously there has been clarity and there has been information kind of shared regarding the direction of travel. I've also had in-depth conversations, as we would in normal practice, with all of the directors. And so again, transparency around any emerging risks and how potentially some of the redundancy and the hemorrhaging of that experience may play out. It is something we're very mindful as well when we come to the annual setting of what we wish to audit for the forthcoming year. And again, that will influence. It's standard practice irrespective of any restructures that do occur, because inevitably there's usually some visibility with retirements that are forthcoming. So all of that is influenced with what it is that we want to have a look at, and I've already fed back any concerns that I would have had during the restructure process.
That's very helpful and assuring. Colleagues, questions on the internal audit report? Anyone with any question? Councillor Churchman.
I'm looking at the graph. I hope I'm on the right page, page 21, the Audit Assurance Directorate. There's nothing against finance, and in the table below, it's got 0. I don't quite understand how that fits in with the other things, please.
The reason finance have nothing alongside them is there weren't activities that were audited within that directorate. The Isle of Wight is one of the few directorates where finance is finance in its purest form, whereas elsewhere finance usually encompasses payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, all of what we deem to be the fundamental systems. Well, those systems actually sit in a different directorate. So whilst there is a significant amount of grant work that is performed, which does feed into finance, the grant work is excluded from the opinion. The reason the grant work's excluded from the opinion is it can only ever be a yes from the outset that they've complied with the terms and conditions, or they have to make amendments to how they, to the expenditure in order it to be signed off as green, that it is complied with the terms and conditions. So the only thing that we've performed which could be attributed to finance is the grant work, and that I have to exclude because that will mask any underlying patterns that we may have in relation to systems.
Colleagues, any other questions on this? I do find your reports amongst the most digestible. So that may be explaining why we're not coming to you with many questions. But I just also want to thank you for that assurance that you gave at the start to my own question, that the next few months, indeed the next year, are going to be a time of obvious change. Change has implications. It's big change, and what we need to be alive to within the remit of this committee is how that change is. The risks of that change are being minimised. And obviously, we come on to the risk register a bit later on, but thank you. In which case, otherwise, I believe it's to receive and note your report. Colleagues, are you happy to receive and note? I see nods. And then it's to you again. It's item 7, the internal audit progress report.
Councillor, the progress report is anything that we have not communicated to you as being the results since the last.
Sorry, could you just put your mic a bit closer, because I'm struggling to hear. I'm not sure how Councillor Churchman is at the moment.
So the progress report is obviously anything that we have not previously brought to this committee since the last reporting period, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you're right, was March of this year. So there are a couple of items of work to flag, not because they are significant, but they are rated as limited assurance. The reason they're rated as limited assurance are in relation to the risk exposure that they potentially pose. So the first is St Mary's School, and that's rated as limited because there were a number of areas where there were weaknesses within the control framework. So collectively, it has resulted in limited. We also had 2 significant areas which are on the food safety standard side, which again has attributed an assurance level of limited. Saying that, the fundamental thing that underlies that particular area is the fact that we have not inspected all of the premises that we are due to inspect. However, the caveat around that is that the Food Safety Agency itself are actually pretty comfortable with the approach of the council, which is that it is prioritising the work that it needs to perform. The final area that we had that is limited, that is included in here, is in relation to the asbestos framework, and I use that framework deliberately in that we don't have concerns that there are any asbestos breaches. It is the documentation that sits underneath, and that is a follow-up report where, whilst significant progress has been made, there are still gaps in some of those arrangements. Beyond that, Chair, those are the areas that are limited. Happy to answer any questions on the content of any of the other pockets of work that we've performed.
Colleagues, Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I'm seriously concerned about the health and food safety. We are a tourist island. The majority, most of our economy is supported by incoming tourists. If we have any form of food poisoning, etc., shut your ears, Louise, the press would pick it up, and that would not do us as an island any favours at all. So I find that quite, what's the word, not dangerous, but really, I just think it's something that should be addressed because of our situation. Thank you, Chair.
The service recognises that point exactly, and there is a robust action plan that is in place. I think one of the difficulties many services of this nature is that they struggle to appoint qualified individuals within that particular field. But the action plans that they do have in place is to target all of their high risk areas, and their proposals to rectify the position moving forward.
Councillor Peace.
Thank you, Chair. This I find interesting, this particular subject as well, because it was an item of concern even when I was cabinet member, and we're going back a little way now. So I know and understand the pressures that are there. Have we got any further progress on that action plan though, over and above what we had 2 or 3 years ago?
Councillor, I would need to go back and check in that I believe, and my colleague alongside me will correct me, but I believe this is the first time that we've audited this particular area under the current arrangement. So I'm not familiar with any historic audit reports. And the position from 2 years, I would need to again ascertain. Obviously, 2 years ago, we would have been in a pandemic. They would have stepped down with the ability to be able to go out on various sites. So the correlation between 2 years and now might not be brilliant, but if you want some comfort as to whether is the problem improving or is it growing, I would need to come back to you. I think that it is improving, but I need to confirm.
No, thank you. I'd actually forgotten about the pandemic. So the 2 years prior to the pandemic, when I was cabinet member, but and as I say, I do know and understand the pressures that the particular department are under. But it would be nice to know that we are moving things forwards. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Which of our cabinet colleagues then is cited on this? Is it yourself, Councillor Luciani? I know you're a member of this committee, but if you could kind of sort of take that hat off for a moment and then put your cabinet member hat on. Are you able to give us an indication?
I think you gave a good overview of it, really. It's the pandemic, people were being diverted off. Money that was going to be put into the department, and then the pressures that we had, the inflation that was not put in, and now we're in a restructure. So there's been many things that have happened, including bringing people on. I think there are people there for training now to get up to speed, but it does take a while for that to happen. But what I will do is give you all a members update. I'll get some data and get it to all members of the council.
Thank you, Councillor Luciani. I think that'd be really, really important because, as Councillor Churchman suggested, I'm sure Ms Hill wouldn't have closed her ears at that point. It is an area of the service which is one of those things which is most in the public domain for when things aren't going quite right for a particular premises, and they are picked up for a poor review or whatever. So I'm satisfied from the discussions I previously had with you and what you've said today around the high risk stuff. But I think what Councillor Cheney may be able to add right now as well.
Yeah, it is the high risk ones are being dealt with.
Yeah.
It's the lower, so they're all from different categories. So the higher risks are always dealt with, and then as they catch up, then they start going down to the lower risk ones.
And I think what could be helpful then in your briefing note too, is that you explain what it is that fits into a high risk, a lesser risk, and so on, so that in fact there can be some kind of public visibility on that. That would be great. Thank you very much. Councillor Jarman.
So one observation and a question, actually. The observation is, I understand what you're saying about prioritisation with food safety. The danger in a way with the prioritisation is that whilst there might be a number of categories that you would prioritise things into, by addressing only the highest concerned categories, what one can end up with is presenting results to the island and to the media and the marketplace, which are particularly skewed. If I categorise things in between, very bad, reasonable and good, just to take a simple model of it. If I were only to investigate the ones which were of the very gravest concern, I'd be more likely to generate results which were perhaps more critical of the island as a whole, because I would only be investigating that category. And we are very mindful, as Councillor Churchman said, about the media will respond to those. They don't tend to respond to the ones that get very good results. They do tend to respond to the ones that get bad results. And if we're prioritising ones that are likely to give a bad result, the overall impression can be skewed. Andrew's looking at me because he's got his statistician hat on here, and he's thinking about one of the recent maths questions, I suspect. But so that's just an observation, and a danger of skewing the impression and the results that we get. The other question relates to the school issue, which came up. I think it was the first one on your list. And I wondered how many of the individual schools were part of the review, and whether any of the issues that were found in that particular school were found in other schools, or indeed were systemic across the school system. Thank you.
From recollection, Councillor, we actually performed full reviews on 3 schools. Saying that, we also performed some work in relation to the school's financial value statement, if I correctly titled it. And that is a self-assessment to which the schools are required to perform. It gets sent into finance and it's part of a statement that gets returned. So we do full school audits, follow-up school audits, and we also do the SFVS return. Now, the SFVS return, if you are a governor at all and sit on any of the schools' bodies, they are required to perform that on a yearly basis, and a number of the questions actually cover the control framework, and we will do a dip test of those to see which ones are particularly problematic. All of the results are then fed through to who it was, Barry Downer, but if he's now moved to another job, we need to find out who the current incumbent is. We feed that through to finance because we work closely with them to communicate any patterns or any trends so that schools that we haven't audited can take on board any lessons to learn. In relation to, so that's kind of the framework and the background. In relation to, are there any patterns that have emerged from the schools that we've audited for 22-23? Inevitably, I think the patterns are probably in and around the income and the inconsistencies. However, schools actually handle a very small amount of income. And I think because they handle that on such an infrequent basis, sometimes some of the arrangements around that are not done so regularly. And that's probably the issue that we have, in that they collect and make certain that they have a higher value before they kind of go through and bank. I do not recall any other particular patterns and trends. There are generally patterns, though, on the SFVS side, that school's financial statement side. But again, we feed that back to all schools that are maintained schools on the island. I can pull out for you what those patterns were, but I can't recall them off the top of my head.
Thank you. Any other questions, colleagues, on this report? And obviously, Councillor Joni has given us an assurance that she'll send a briefing note around the food safety aspect of whatever. Oh, you wish to
just say I probably made it more simplified than it actually is. So I'm going to get you the facts. I'm just very aware it's turning to a bit of scrutiny rather than audit. So I will sit back.
Well, I certainly it would be helpful, and we can distill out those things which are matters of for this committee. And of course, we remember that the audit team isn't the ones actually delivering the inspection side of things. So you are the reporters on, not the doers of that service. But I'm sure you'll highlight to us anything further on that as and when it comes up.
Patterns and trends are actually what influence what we then want to look at, so we will have visibility on them.
Otherwise, colleagues, if you're content to just note that report. I'm always aware that when we note a report, it sounds like we haven't done anything, but I think there were some quite searching questions there. So those who might read the minutes should note that the narrative before then, that also highlights the work that we're doing. In which case, we are on to item 8, which is the Property Investment Portfolio Annual Report. Which officer is, so it's going to be Mr. Ashman. Yeah. So you're going to be highlighting to us any key points out of that. Of course, we will have had regard to the papers, so just bring out those key points for us.
Yes, of course, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and my apologies for not being with you this morning. Yeah, this is the annual update to the committee in relation to the commercial portfolio, and obviously there's some fairly significant updates there in relation to particularly the wider economic situation over the last 12 to 18 months, and the impact of that on particularly the value of the overall portfolio. The good news is obviously the main objective of the intervention is to secure the revenue commitment, and with the active management of our property team, we're able to report that revenue commitment is maintained. So a net revenue of more than £1 million to obviously support the council's medium-term financial strategy is consistently applied. I did reference the active management. There are obviously continuing events with the occupants of those properties, and we obviously seek to get ahead of that in terms of any appropriate negotiations. But the overall picture in terms of the short term is obviously the impact on overall value due to the broader economic position, but obviously hopefully a return to medium to longer term value of the commercial industrial sector. So yeah, happy to take any further questions or any points of clarification, Chair, the committee might have.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ashman. I'm aware that the report is also in the name of the Cabinet Member, Councillor Bacon. So I'll just invite Councillor Bacon if he wishes to make any comment at this stage. Otherwise, we'll move to questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Excuse me. I really don't think there's an awful lot to add to what Chris has said. The report sets out the picture. He's highlighted the good points. There are obviously some points in there that aren't quite so good, but I think I won't add more and just leave it to the committee and any questions.
Thank you. But I thought I should invite you in though, just to make. So, colleagues, any questions on this report? Councillor Jarman.
So clearly at some stage there needs to be a strategic decision made and a strategic approach taken to capital investments, particularly those based on the mainland. There were in the past quite a number of questions about why we even engaged in those and whether the realisation of return on that investment could be sustained. The market has changed, and I know Chris is very familiar with this. This isn't an issue particularly to our portfolio, but more generally in the marketplace, where space is viewed and is used and is therefore valued in a very different way. And so I wondered at what point there would be a strategic review of our mainland capital portfolio and a decision taken about whether to capitalise that value in some other way and use that, which it would be required to do at that stage, to repay that element of the borrowing which was secured for the origination of the investment.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jarman. Yeah, it's obviously an issue that the Cabinet would need to keep under review, particularly from advice from the Section 151 officer as well, in terms of the overall review of the medium-term financial plan. So definitely something we'll take back to Cabinet and obviously to our colleague in finance.
Do you wish to follow up on that, Councillor Jarman?
No, I think it's just something that you know, as a councillor, when we're looking at how control processes are put in place, that we need to understand what is the strategic process for managing that. If indeed it is an exit strategy, or if it's to repossession that in some way.
If I could just pitch it.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the basic position, the fundamental answer to the question, which Mr. Ashman just alluded to, it's an ongoing consideration. We're in a volatile situation with markets and so on. It's certainly not a good idea to capitalise at the moment, but we just have to see how things pan out. But it's not that we're going to park it for 6 months and come back to it. It's an ongoing consideration. I don't think I can say more than that. We wait to see what happens.
Well, certainly there are reports to this committee quite quite regularly, so it may be a question we return to from time to time. Colleagues, any other questions on this report? Otherwise, I believe it's to receive a note. So if we're content to receive and note this report, we'll move on. Thank you. We will do so. Thank you, Mr. Ashman. Thank you, Councillor Bacon. And it's the Treasury Management Annual Report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm going to talk through the basics of the Treasury Management Performance Report for 22-23. I'm not going to go into details because I have assumed that you have all read it, and we'll come back with any pertinent questions after the event. Back in March 2022, the then Audit Committee approved the Treasury Management Strategy for 22-23, and we've used, this is the basis for the performance that we are measuring ourselves against. Just to put a little bit of context in, although the report itself covers 22-23, I'm sure you're all aware there have been some changes to the interest rate since that time. We had a rise to 4.5% in May and then to 5% in June. And just to let you know that our current, the current position from our Treasury investment advisors, Arling Close, is that the forecast is likely to go up again, potentially another 25 basis points to 5.25% in August, and then again in September. But it's a forecast, and forecasts can be changed. So looking back at the actual position at the end of March 2023, at that point we had external borrowing of 198.2 million, which is just about 2.5 million less than at the end of the previous year. This was made up of a balance between a reduction in the long-term borrowing of about 12.5 million, which comprised the paying off of former PWLB loans that had reached maturity and the paying down of some of our more recent loans, which are paid in 6 monthly instalments. We pay off some of the principal. And we also, unfortunately, then we had to take out some additional short-term debt, which we required to maintain our operational cash levels. We also got caught a little bit because obviously, as we've taken out additional borrowing, which meant the amount of investments that we held had obviously reduced, and they had decreased by about 23.5 million. Just to let the committee know that in the beginning or prior years, we had obviously during the pandemic, we received a lot of income in from the government for grants, which meant that we were fairly cash rich at that point. And then this has obviously been paid out, and we used a lot of that money to pay off a lot of our external debt, our short-term debt. So we're now having to start, unfortunately, to get some of that back in the house. But it's we can see at the end of March the rates we got were as competitive as we could have got them. And I think we were actually quite lucky. And looking back at it from the position we're in now, the rates are quite good. But despite having to suffer the increase in interest rates, we still managed to produce a net saving of 3.6 million, which we contributed towards the council's overall annual budget result. And this is in context of the fact that the long-term loans, which are the vast majority of our loans, are at fixed rate. So the rates that we're paying now are the rates we're going to pay until they are matured. So it's only the 25 million of short-term loans, which a short-term loan is less than 1 year, that we will be suffering any form of interest rate risk on them. When we actually produced the Treasury Management Strategy and also the companion strategy report, the capital strategy that went through to full council, for 2023, there was a number of limits and indicators set on those reports. And against this, we've been measuring ourselves for our Treasury performance, and we haven't actually exceeded any of those limits throughout this period. That's all I really wanted to bring up at this point, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Colleagues, questions? Councillor Jarman, you're smiling at me.
No, I think they're very good results overall, and I think we shouldn't overlook that. And the team have done a fantastic job. I don't think a lot of these things do come down to luck at the end of the day. I think there's a degree of analysis which is done, which is very thorough, and correct decisions are made at the right time, and that helps. So I think of course, the 3.6 million contribution is always a very valuable one, and that's something that's been going on now for a couple of years, that contribution into the accounts. So I think we should commend the team for what they've done on this way. I don't hold, on a personal basis, so much confidence in those rates coming down as much as which is predicted. I mean, these things are judgmental issues in the marketplace. I think we've all seen the stubbornness of what's happened with inflation in the UK, some of the monetary policy issues which have fed into some of those complications, commodity prices which have fed into those as well. Those seem to be long lasting and in some cases perhaps being exacerbated at the moment, particularly by the illegal invasion of the Ukraine by Russia. So I would expect the rates to remain fairly high for a longer time. But I think the caution that's been expressed and the management of it is to be commended. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I'd like to support Councillor Jarman's comments. I really think when you look at some of the other councils across this country who are in desperate financial straits with the government actually putting in their own administration. I know we might be small, but the size is immaterial. Either the stuff is handled correctly financially or it isn't. So congratulations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think the whole committee would place that on record. Of course, one of my I think what I noticed around the whole kind of inflation side of things that we've had a couple of months in which the surprises have been in different directions. One month where it was slightly higher than what forecasters were predicting, and then another month, was it only last month, where things were a little bit lower than the forecast. And so that volatility must be difficult to keep in mind. But obviously we do have a team that's working very hard. Ultimately, though, what concerns me is that we are, and have long been, I'm sure, council that's reliant on those returns. If that 3.6 million didn't come in, imagine the situation we'd be in. But that's not something that's in our power. Ultimately, it is for government to consider the funding of local governments, such that I'd almost like to see that the sorts of generations that you're getting are the windfall that allows us to do the extra things so that we're not reliant on them. But then I'm stepping beyond the terms of reference of this committee, so I'll shut myself up on that one. But if there are no other questions on that, it was a very clear report as always. Good work is being done. Just keep doing the good work. Thank you. In which case, moving along very well. Item 10, am I in the right place? Great, we're on to the procurement half-yearly report. Do I have anyone who just wishes to highlight any key points out of that?
I'm on the line, Alice Hadridge, Interim Procurement Leader.
Is there anything, Ms. Hadridge, that you would like to highlight to us from this report?
Thank you, Chair. Just overall, we've seen a continuing slight downward trend in the number of awards made and the value of those, which are detailed in the report. We have continuing reporting on the number of waivers of the council standing orders. Those are also decreasing. Obviously, something we monitor very regularly. The ones that we do have explanations that we set out in Appendix 2, but often are from a particular area of need that are very urgent in nature, and often something that we don't, as a council, have much control over or receive very much notice of. That particularly affects adult social care. The I guess key area since the last report that my predecessor Hayley Holden presented at the end of October is the procurement strategy progress, which obviously the procurement strategy was approved by the Cabinet in October last year, setting out the overall context for procurement and contract management at the Council. I've included in Appendix 3 an update, a report on the progress on the 4 key themes. I think it's fair to say we've made good progress. A number of actions completed. These are predominantly where we've needed to update the Council's procurement documentation to reflect the key themes in the strategy around community wellbeing, climate and environment, commercial approach, and skills and capabilities. So we've had a good sort of first period of progress against the strategy. Obviously, with Hayley's departure, I'm covering the role on an interim basis for the Council. There are some actions that we know we want to progress further, but we are subject to the permanent procurement team leader appointment being made, hopefully in the next couple of months. Happy, I think, to leave it at that, Chair, and I'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. It did feel to me when I looked at this one that the number of waivers was down. So I'm glad that that's what you've confirmed to me. It did feel a little while back there were a significant number, and the key theme there is the urgency in particular areas. You've kind of answered my other question, which is about the further progress. You've given us a progress report, but the further progress. So hopefully you'll be continuing to be able to make good progress on that. But is it particularly contingent on that recruitment?
I think in the medium term, yes, but there are pieces of work that I've picked up on an interim basis with colleagues within the climate environment working group to try and predominantly focused on building more guidance, writing more guidance for service areas on how we can ensure that those key themes, particularly climate environment and wellbeing, community wellbeing, are factored in early into our specifications and into our evaluations when we're running procurements. That's a key piece of work to get this strategy embedded.
Thank you. That's helpful. Colleagues, questions on the procurement report? Everybody's getting away with things quite easily today, which is commendable, really, that the reports are explaining things well enough for us. So thank you for that. In which case, again, I think it's to receive a note. So colleagues, if you're content to do that, then we shall do so. Thank you very much. We look forward to the next half of the report.
Thank you, Chair.
So, item 11 is the Council's risk profile. We heard earlier a public question, so very, very important that there's some addressing of that in our discussions this morning. Just a reminder that it was around the risk relating to schools' budgets, and a comment out around what the schools forum had indicated around the reduction in primary school places. It was a pointed question, but a good question in that making a particular point that the issue around the schools has been in matter of public discussion in the last couple of months. So I think what I'm looking for is there a cabinet member, maybe it is Councillor Bacon rather than Councillor Luciani's on the committee, who might want to just comment question at the start, and I would guess I'm looking up at the screen for Councillor Bacon to come in on that one.
I'm sure there's much comment I could give. What's the specific point you're looking for a comment on? I should say, in relation to schools deficit, I ought to declare an interest. I am a school governor, and as such, and as any school governor, very aware of the deficit situation, which is the ongoing thing each and every school probably has at the top of the agenda for every governor's meeting. It's absolutely fundamental to keeping our schools going. But perhaps I could ask if there's a specific question you're seeking comment on, Chairman.
Well, if I recall the questioner's question properly, and colleagues, if you've got memories better than mine, do correct me. It was, does the administration intend to do something around the primary school places? I think that was the pointedness of the question. In other words, something was coming forward and then something was backed away from. The Schools Forum has made comments in that regard. So maybe just give a flavour of where Cabinet's thinking is at the moment.
Well, of course, I'm not the Cabinet Member for Education, and she is not present here, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the policy side of things for another Cabinet Member in that way. But I think I can say from the whole Cabinet view that, of course, subsequent to the school places presentation that we had the, I was going to say surprise, shock might be a better word, of Hampshire's announcement that they seek to disengage from the partnership we currently have with them. I think that's probably the overriding pretty much everything else at the moment, because we have to work out how we're going to manage the next 6 months, the disengaging, and what is to follow on from that. It's a very active discussion, but I think it's probably the case that we need to have that discussion and make those decisions, which will be soon coming, before we can look to addressing the particular issues such as taking forward schools place planning. There's obviously an issue there, it needs to be dealt with, but I think we need to know the wider organisational context within which we're going to be dealing with it to be able to take it forward.
Thank you. Hopefully I captured the questioner's question through this committee. I perfectly take on board that there is a Cabinet Member who looks after this, but of course Cabinet is a corporate body, so you will have your discussions, you'll be aware of that. So I suspect we'll be getting a fuller update at September's Cabinet on your thinking on this, and obviously Audit and Governance does have a meeting later in September where we might be able to pick up some of that. So we will probably be looking to your September Cabinet meeting for Councillor Andre to give us a pretty full update on the situation, I guess.
I think that's appropriate. I suspect there'll be decisions and news prior to that, frankly, because this is a major thing that we need to deal with. It's about the safety and security and education of our children, and an absolute priority for that reason. So it's not a question of waiting to September. It's we'll be making decisions as soon as we can, as soon as we have the information we need, and so on.
Thank you. Councillor Jarman.
Yeah, so just returning perhaps more to the remit of this committee, I think the concern is about the continuing delay and what happens with the debt which is rolling up within the school environment, and also what happens with the transfer of that debt upon any changes within the number of schools which are operational or combined, and what way. So perhaps we could ask that when that information is brought forward, alongside it is a financial analysis which covers the positioning of the debt, the scale of the debt for each school, and the liability which would be subsumed into the Isle of Wight Council with each of those eventualities being discussed, just so that we understand what the scale of that is and the time scale, alongside, of course, what is a tremendously challenging discussion for parents, schools, and a big impact on the lives of all of our children.
Certainly. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, added into all this, we could be talking about a statutory obligation would be to have a Director of Education and all the staff backup that goes with it. So again, as an audit committee, we would require some sort of costings analysis. I know that we paid Hampshire, obviously, for the provision of the Education and Children's Services work. but I think I can remember Steve Cocker saying to me, I'm the cheapest director of education in this country because you pay only half of my salary. So I think this is a very, very important aspect of the costs involved. Thank you, Chair.
Certainly. Just want to be making sure I've done been fair by the question as well. The question also was particularly around whether there would be consideration of bringing in schools deficits into as a specific, something specific on the strategic risk register. So if I record that rightly. Colleagues, are there questions on further questions or comments on the risk profile or other areas before I launch into a couple I've got myself? Councillor Jarman.
Yeah, so I think part of it is risk. The risk of the event actually happening is a risk. But if the event does happen, then there is a statutory process regarding the debt which occurs. So although part of it is risk-based, part of it is fairly definitive and would be well known. It's a question of knowing what is the process by which that's going to be managed, what is the scale of the debt for each of the schools that may or may not be involved, and what would be the eventuality of the total transfer of that debt into the council and how that debt would be managed.
That's more of a comment, is it would looking for, yeah, sure. So I've got a couple of questions on the broader risk register. Is there an officer who will be able to pick up on that? Sorry, yes.
Sorry, yes, Emma Bruce. I'm here in lieu of Debbie Downer.
Okay, yes, indeed. So I'm just looking at the report that under strategic risk 1, the column relating to, so this is lack of financial resource, etc. The commentary there seems to referring to Q3 of last year, so that's quite a lag period. Is there any sort of anything that you would want to add in terms of how the situation is now?
So just to confirm that the finance risk number 1 aligns with the finance publication in the quarterly management performance report. It will be reviewed for Q4 and it will be published with that performance report in September of this year.
By which time we'll be through Q1 of the new year. Ms. Appledale, yes.
Yeah, so just to add to that, as Emma rightly says, we report on Q4 at the same time as reporting on Q1 for the new financial year as well. So the QPMR report to Cabinet in September will cover both of those quarters.
I wanted to bring that up because otherwise it looks like there's a bit of a lag in terms of what's been discussed in the risk register. Strategic risk 6 reference caseload reviews. Let me just try to find that. On the paper, it would be page 8 onwards. So I noted that one column refers to weekly bases, but then in the discussion, it's referring now to daily bases. Is this, to what extent is that a reflection of the risk escalating and therefore needing much tighter management? And is there an anticipation that going back to scrutiny on a weekly basis? If you found where I'm referring to.
I don't have an answer to that at the moment, but I'm happy to go away and report back to you this week with an answer.
I'm happy with that, and we can then circulate that to the committee. On strategic risk 11, I thought it would be useful to draw out a bit more explanation of what is meant by reinterpretation of the contract in terms of the PFI. What's underlying that? Is there anybody able to? It's on page 13 of the 22 pages. hear not. Respect, so you.
Well, just to say that I'm happy to take that away and to speak to Colin Rowlands about that and get an update for the committee.
I think that'd be really, really important. The word reinterpretation is doing a lot of work, I suspect, and it would be helpful to have something that draws that out more. Maybe it was somewhere else that I've missed it. It's barely what 6-7 weeks until we meet again, so in late September. So perhaps we could revisit that with some priority. Certainly, I know there is the restructure is going through, but if it can be noted that the relevant senior officer could be present to help us discuss that matter, that would be very helpful. And in strategic risk 13, I'll just highlight that there was a discussion around capacity. There was a discussion around the strategic capacity and interventions adverse with a commentary of a pressure point adversely affecting the capacity and capabilities within the Isle of Wight Council at all levels. I think that's something at the moment I'm just highlighting in open committee. There's something we're going to have to be very much alive to see how the risk register adapts to that and how risk mitigation goes forward from that. One thing I am looking forward to, the Chief Executive is arranging for me to observe corporate management team in their discussions of risk. I hope they won't feel too much observer bias and feel that they have to step outside of what they would normally do. But it is part of the, my reading of SIP for guidance, that it would be quite helpful for me as chair at least to have some discussion just to get a sense of how this register is working in practice. We look at it to see if it's covering all the points and is fit for its purpose. But it would. So I'm just headlining that one. And finally, I will just note that I had a very interesting discussion when they, and this might be down Councillor Peacey's line of work, if I remember rightly, the cybersecurity side of things. I had a very, very good discussion with the outside people who were inspecting us on that. We're very much looking forward to their commentary. I think they made a couple of comments which I'm hoping is going to come through on their report around how we place cybersecurity and those issues on our risk register. So, but Councillor Peace.
Thank you, Chair. And on that point, yeah, my business is cybersecurity. So, and knowing the parties concerned, I've looked at the risk register. I'm actually quite comfortable where we're at because I know what's going on. I know what's gone on in the past. And it looks like we've got a number of things that are due to be published to us anyway. There's a report that's been completed at the end of July. So I'm quite content with where we are with it.
And that's very helpful to have an expert view on these things. I wanted to report back though that outside of these meetings, I do other things in regard to the committee, and that was one of a very fruitful but also very searching kind of discussion around things, and made me very aware how important as a chair it is to be really engaged with a whole range of things. So still getting used to the role, 2 years in, but getting ever more engaged. Audit is a delight. Audit and governance is a delight to me. Anyway, those were all my comments and kind of questions myself as chair. Anything else that might have stimulated? Otherwise, our requirement is to please remember that we both note and approve. I think the point, remember that the questioner raised around the relationship to the school's budget side of things has been noted and aired. Hopefully the questioner will feel when he reviews our recording or our minutes that we covered that. But Councillor Churchman, before I
yes, on page 138, I think this is the time to bring it up. I'm interested in this safety valve programme. It's all right, the first I've heard of it, fair enough, but it talks about the complexity, etc. So how does this fit in with a council that at the moment is strapped for cash and actually strapped for staff. And could somebody please explain a little bit about it? Thank you.
Do we have anyone who can cover that at the moment? Otherwise, this may be another one we'll need a briefing note to committee from. At the moment, I'm looking at the screen. Yeah. It would be noted that we'll need something for. So thank you, Councillor Churchman, for highlighting that. It occurs to me, and it might be something not necessary for our next meeting, but certainly once I've had a chance to observe corporate management team, that we might schedule into our work plan a time when we have everybody at the senior level, cabinet members and the senior management team, where we do a deeper dive as a committee onto the register, so that we don't find ourselves sort of asking questions like this and then relying on notes. So I'll just flag that one up, and I'm sure when she returns, the chief executive will be delighted with me that I suggested that. So I don't want to add to workloads, but at the same time, I think there may be a case for a full team deep dive on those, and that would be the cabinet as well. Otherwise, we've received and do we approve what we have before us at this moment? There are indeed nods on that, so thank you very much. So item 12 is the review of the Constitution. The monitoring officer, Mr. Potter, is always looking at the Constitution, looking at how to ensure that it is clearer, more fit for purpose. I know I had a very interesting, actually, 2-hour discussion with him around several sections of the Constitution a little while ago, with something like 150 various footnotes. I draw that out not to bring out the fact that he is looking at things in an incredibly detailed way to make sure that our Constitution is as fit for purpose and is as properly informed as possible. We're still waiting upon the planning side of things to come forwards. Have to wait to see what does there come. Full Council, of course, has given some instruction to the committee, which we'll come on to in a little while, which potentially could have some constitutional impacts, but that will have to go through a whole task and finish approach and then. But otherwise, I'm in regular discussion with the officer around the Constitution. If you've got any thoughts as committee members that you want to feed through to me, to him, do so, and we'll add to the footnotes as well as the main text. Item 13 is partnership arrangements. This was discussed at corporate scrutiny a little while back, was it not? And I did highlight that I thought there may be aspects of it that related to the work of audit and governance. So is there an officer who just would like to highlight any points out of that before I open it up to members? Spence.
I think it's a really informative report, and I think probably the crux of the issue here is to understand what is meant by a partnership. And I think the report really lays that out clearly. So hopefully it gives you some reassurance that there are governance arrangements around partnerships that we do have with the council. Obviously, there's a whole plethora of as you can see in the appendix of partnerships that we have, and that there are the governance arrangements in line with the partnership arrangements.
I'd certainly echo that. I thought that what was first helpful was just to see this list, just to see how much we do it in partnership as opposed to a contractual arrangement, the delivery of service for us. I certainly thought there may be things that we might have in mind around the risk register side of things, and because partnership does come with risk, which is less controllable because we are working with others. One of our partners, of course, in one area of work is the St Mary's Trust, and at their last board meeting, I went along to their board meeting, asked a couple of questions myself, but I was very interested to read their risk paper the way in which they manage their risks and the way they are reported through their subcommittees and then through to board or whatever. So that might be a little project of mine to pick out a few key partners who do meet in public from time to time to go and observe how they discuss these matters and see what their papers are saying. But colleagues, any questions on this? Councillor Peace.
Thank you, Chair. I guess when we're talking about partnership arrangements, we've obviously got the issues of Hampshire walking away from education. I'm also slightly concerned about what happens with the 151 officer and Portsmouth Council and the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Rescue Authority and all that kind of stuff. Are we still content that we're secure with all those other partnerships? Thank you.
Who might answer? So who is sort of the chief executive for today, I think?
Well, I suppose the answer is I don't know. But given that each partnership is has a board, has people are working together on that, I suspect that those conversations would be had at the very earliest stage. But it is something that I could take away and discuss with Wendy and perhaps bring back at a later date.
Certainly. Councillor Luciani, I think you just beat Councillor Jarman.
I just want to assure you about the fire and rescue service. It's all fine.
Can't hear.
It's all fine with the fire and rescue service.
Councillor Jarman.
I think the recent news has highlighted one concern I have about partnerships is that we do need a time frame if we are going to be given notice of disengagement on them, which is fairly lengthy. For many people, a 6-month period might seem quite lengthy, but in reality, it is not enough. Particularly where skill sets need to be transferred, people perhaps need to be recruited, organisational changes accommodated, accommodation. You know, there are a lot of working arrangements which can be radically altered within that. And so I think where we are developing partnerships, an annual cycle with a 1-year exit would seem to me in most cases to be an absolute minimum. And I would encourage that framework is built into all partnership arrangements going forward. I think we had a discussion on a few items that came up at the recent health and committee meeting that we had. I think it was a week ago on Monday, a week ago today, where there were other issues in relation to our working relationship with the health sector, which came up. And again, any short-term changes to those can be enormously difficult for us to accommodate, and indeed for the team responsible. So a long exit route is always going to be required.
I'd absolutely echo that it is something that gets into the whole risk side of things as opposed over and above the service delivery side of things. So Councillor Bacon, you've come back onto our screen, so I presume you wish to make a comment.
Just very briefly, the question asked by Councillor Peace does actually highlight what the officer said. There's a difference between partnerships and other arrangements. Of course, paragraph 2.2 identifies that the arrangement with Hampshire is a strategic commission service and not a partnership as such, and under its own particular rules. And I'd just highlight that, B, mention that or highlight what Councillor Luciani says, that this has come out of the blue as a one-off. It doesn't certainly impact the Portsmouth arrangement, which is entirely separate. There may be elements of the relationship we currently have with Hampshire in relation to care that we need to look at extremely carefully, as they will be something, whatever happens, we wish to maintain, but that work is underway. In terms of saying we should always have a 12-month exit period should a situation like this arise, well, I don't think we can say that. That would be a massive imposition in some situations, which may be quite easily disengaged from. We have so I don't think, from my view, my understanding, to say 12 months is always necessary would be a good thing. It may be in some cases, it may well not be in others. But we have on the face of it, a 6-month process we're facing with Hampshire. I don't think anyone is at the moment suggesting that that is too short or indeed too long. But again, as I said when I was speaking earlier, this has come up out of the blue, but a lot of work is going on in relation to it already, and I'm sure we'll have some firmer information in the very near future.
Thank you. Colleagues, any more comment on the partnerships paper? Councillor Churchman.
I think contractual arrangements have very much to rely on the people running the contract in the middle and supplying the information. In some cases, 6 months would be adequate. With education, which is an exception, then we really did need a year to get our house in order. But however, as I said, it depends so much on individuals as to whether they grasp the nettle and get on with it. So I'm not quite sure I agree with Councillor Charman about a year. I honestly believe that each contract has to be looked at specifically. Thank you.
I wanted to just flag 2 things. The section 151 is under a 113 agreement, as is audit services. I also wanted to flag, though, that the visibility, do you recall, Councillor Garrett, the SIPFA self-assessment on the effectiveness of the committee? Within that is whether you have visibility on the partnership arrangements, i.e. whether they're delivering in line. So I actually just wanted to flag that something of this nature that is coming through to the committee actually feeds quite nicely in there. Obviously not those that you are under contract with, those that you are in partnership with. So sorry, not answering your question, it was just flagging 2 other points.
But it's helpful that you've reminded me of that, and will certainly be something I'm sure we can keep in mind, having brought it before us as well, that I'm quite keen to see ways in which we develop our work so that we are not just responding to a number of reports, which we necessarily and rightly do, but also can start to look at being a little bit more proactive in these sorts of things. Bearing in mind we only meet four times a year, and members and officers have more than enough to do. I think on the Hampshire situation, I think there is something to be learned here about building in, and the framework document does discuss risk, I'm sure, a number of places, as to the degree of risk of a sudden cessation of service, as in suddenness can in 1 year can be still a very sudden event for something that is big and complex, like the services that we are receiving from Hampshire. I think one of the things that I did find troubling was that it was an announcement made just before a period when a lot of members and a lot of officers are going on well-earned leave, particularly officers. So where there's a tempo lost in that, and also in that 6-month period, can't help it, but there is the Christmas period as well. So actually what feels like 6 months may only be 4 months in terms of possible work, and on top of an organisation that's going through a restructure. So Hampshire have not helped us in this decision over and above just simply making this decision. But I'm sure, I'm pretty assured that this organisation is on top of that, and I'm pretty assured that the discussions that are happening are being done well. So September may be a point where we pick this up again within the terms of remit of this committee. So I'm where I may be straying on that. Colleagues, any further comments, questions? Councillor Cheney.
Just to clarify,
going back to partnerships that you spoke about the first authority. They are authority in their own right. So their partnership is different with Hampshire, where they buy in the service for the Section 151 officer, etc. And I sit on that, but we're not responsible for any of that now.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair. It's just, it makes me uncomfortable if one partnership's starting to fall apart, and we need to seriously look at the other arrangements we have with all the other providers and partnership. And obviously, I was part of the FAR authority anyway, so I'm aware of that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
But you're quite right. Any event like this needs to review of all, even if it's a light touch check-in, that all else is well. If there are no other comments or questions on this paper, we'll certainly have it in mind, committee's work, and we'll just note that we've received it and made, the narrative minutes will cover the comments that we have made. In which case we are on to item 14. So, colleagues, you'll remember that full council has referred to us as a committee a motion to explore. Indeed, it's quite its terms of reference to develop a potential new committee system for the Isle of Wight. Obviously, for the full council to then consider and decide whether it wishes to take forwards. We're given instruction, which is right, that it be politically proportionate. That seems right. Not looking to invite members to that committee to be nominated. We'll go through the usual process through the group leaders, and I know that Councillor Brodie and Councillor Quigley have had a discussion from their underlined status as to who would come onto that. Councillor Jarman, of course, you had started us down a road of some of this work last year and it stalled, but it feels that we've got a very clear instruction. Claire Shand has been, well, the Chief Executive was in touch with me, but Claire Shand, I'm hoping to pick up with her the officer support side of things. But Councillor Brodie's intention would be that this was very much member-led as far as we can. We're very alive to the fact that officers going through the restructure will have more than enough to do. And we are able as members to tap into the local government association and all of the experience from that side of things. So I'm hoping there may be some ways of tapping into officer expertise via the LGA. But I think that's all we need to know, is note that we've been instructed. But Councillor Jarman, yes.
I don't want to be presumptive, Chair, but I wondered whether, given it was Councillor Brodie's motion which initiated the full council, and I've noticed he's been waiting very patiently online, whether you would like to give him an opportunity to say a few words.
Yes, certainly, and thank you for pointing out to me. Councillor Brodie, would you like to expand upon your motion? My apologies, I hadn't noticed your name up on the screen, but that probably is a function of how many people are joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Councillor Garrett, and good morning, everybody on the committee. I'm not normally an observer of the Audit and Governance Committee, but I have found it reasonably interesting. And sadly, I'm probably the only other councillor watching apart from the cabinet member. Anyway, I just wanted to see what was said at the end regarding the motion that was passed unanimously at full council earlier this month. I've got nothing really to add, unless it's to say that you know, I have already agreed as with Councillor Quigley that I will be the non-aligned member of this working group. I am more than happy to be the person that drives the working group at pace, because I believe it's important that we deal with this and get it to January full council and make the final decision on that. I don't want to take too much time with officers. I believe that there's enough talent and ability within the membership of the council and interest in democracy for us to be able to address the terms of reference within the motion. And I just hope we can get membership of the group established as soon as possible, and perhaps start meeting before the end of August. I think that would be good. And thanks for letting me say something. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Absolutely, that the dreaded phrase "at pace" you mentioned there, but that's quite right. We do need to work at pace in the same way as my previous comments around the Hampshire school situation. What feels like a long period of time isn't a long period of time, particularly if people are away or whatever. But it's my intention that we should have had at least a first meeting to map out the roadmap, if nothing else, to scoping all of this, so that we'd be motoring by early September. But yeah, so yes, a meeting before the end of August is in my mind. So I hope I can assure you on that, Councillor Brady. And it may be that you'll be by acclaim elected chair potentially of that group to drive us forward. It would seem only right. Anyway, that means we can move on to item 15, which is our work plan. Any comments upon our work plan? Really grateful to Thomas Tuckwell, who manages this for us, and it's such an easy one to follow. Councillor Churchman.
Yes. Sorry, I would like something added to the work plan. Our provision, monetary provision for sending children off island into care is actually colossal. And I would like the audit committee to recommend that the island seriously consider building a further establishment to cater for children with really extra special needs. I know we have 3 at the moment. One is a charity, the other is Beulah House and St George's. But what I'm talking about is even more seriously disabled children. Now, we have properties on the island which are now empty. I have been, one property flagged up by Councillor Jarman was at the end of the Dodner estate, which is a building in fairly good condition. It's on the edge of Newport. I have not been up there, so I have no idea, but I understand that at the moment it's out of use. Now, why do we not invest in a provision to stop this colossal amount of money going off the island every year? It would be a long-term project. Possibly we wouldn't get a real return between 5 or 10 years, but it has got to be a better solution than what we are doing now. So I would like to recommend that somehow, somewhere, whether it includes, unfortunately, the word consultant always brings pound signs into my head, but whether we get somebody in to seriously look at this. I would point out that Isle Healthcare and Maggie Bennett, who I would declare is a personal friend of mine, built a special brain unit at Northwood House. Now, that's a business lady, but she decided that it was cheaper for the island to do this sort of thing than, again, to be sending people off island. There is also the possibility that we could attract people from the mainland. So it's something I really am concerned about, and that we should consider on a strategic basis. We have the possibility of a public works loan board, or we could even get one of the fund managers, I sit on pensions committee, to become interested in this and see it as a foreseeable investment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Councillor Bacon first.
Thank you for letting me speak on this one. It's an idea that's been around for some time. Indeed, quite a detailed proposal was worked up back in 2015, which has never gone forward. The question that Councillor Churchman asked was in fact asked of Stuart Ashley, who's currently the Director of Children's Services, at our last, I think it was the CLT meeting, and he gave a very long explanation as to how it wouldn't work. I will not attempt to replicate that here, and I'm not saying that means that it's not something the committee should look into, but I think an initial inquiry of Mr. Ashley for the views and explanation he gave to Cabinet a little while ago might be a good thing to do before starting a full-blown work programme. I personally think if we could do it, it would be a brilliant thing to do. As I say, we tried to launch that idea in 2015, but the number of hurdles and difficulties and uncertainties affecting viability of such do seem to make it, from the explanation we had, a very difficult and risky route to take, aside from the potential benefits. So perhaps an initial discussion with Mr. Ashley might be of benefit, because it certainly was for the Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. What I'm always mindful of is the terms of reference and the constitutional terms of reference under which this committee operates. It's not a policy development forum. It's not a scrutiny forum in the way that the statutory scrutiny functions. So I feel that what you're asking us to do on our work plan is not something we can do within its terms of reference. What we can do, and as we have done before, is refer this to either formally or informally through to the scrutiny function. And certainly Councillor Bacon was listening obviously very carefully to what you were saying, Councillor Churchman. The fact that it was looked at before does suggest it might be worth looking at again. It might be that moment in time to revisit that work. But I would imagine it would need, ideally, would come through a policy and scrutiny process that does the deep dive on this, makes a recommendation to Cabinet, does that exploration. Would that satisfy you, do you think, Councillor Church?
Well, I would like a recommendation. It goes to our scrutiny, not health and care scrutiny or children's, but goes to the major corporate scrutiny panel, please. Thank you.
So, certainly, and I would second that. And obviously, corporate scrutiny may then decide to refer it further onwards, but it obviously has some major strategic implications. So, if members are content with that recommendation, we'll take that forward. Thank you, Councillor Churchman, and thank you, Councillor Bacon, for your comments as well, and your institutional memory. A very important thing that when things have been done before and looked at, it's useful to be reminded of that. So, anything else on our work plan? If at any point you think there's something that we should be looking at, let me know. I've worked with Megan to make sure it's kept up to date. Or she works with me, keep me on track. One thing, as I would say though, if there's anything there where you think we could be a little bit more proactive, just bring it forwards, because we do receive a lot of reports, and it's important that we do so. We have to do so. But although I didn't ask full council to put value for money into our title, it's in our terms of reference, and I think there's a bit more work that we can do around the audit and governance side of value for money exploration. So with that in mind, the next item is members' questions. Members, do you have questions? It isn't compulsory, as I always say, but Councillor Churchman, a question which
Yes.
I may not be able to answer.
I'm afraid I missed it earlier on. I wanted to query on page 102, push boat service of 58k to cater for the spring tides for the Cowes floating bridge. I just find, on top of all the other money that we pay, we now have to pay a push boat to push the ruddy ferry onto the platform, the whatever you call it. And as I said, I despair, but I would like an answer, please. Thank you.
Least to attempt. I thought this was. It's an unfortunate situation, but it has. We've had a push boat for some time, have we not? On that. Yeah. So, that's perhaps an example of those sorts of things where we get into our value for money side of things. But I would be hesitant to exactly say that would be one. But Ms. Goodwin, do you think you attempt to respond?
Obviously, the paper that you're referring to, I think, is the procurement paper, isn't it? Yeah, with the expenditure. I think you're right from a value for money perspective that we could do further work. So whether we're kind of from our side of the equation, internal audit, whether we tether some of the activities that looks at some of those waivers or those high expenditure areas, it's part of the risk assessment that we do in any rate. But if you have particular pockets of concern, then yes, that can come channel through and we can do some testing around it. Won't necessarily pick up on everything that you, but those that are within our boundaries, we certainly will.
If there are no other questions, I'll draw this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance this morning. Thank you to those online for joining with us. Thank you particularly to the officers for attending and responding to questions. And thank you to the member of the press who I hope has found our discussions interesting and worthy of a few column inches. Thank you very much. I'll close the meeting at 11.